Good evening and welcome to tonight's program, 411 on new voting laws. My name is Davita Harden. I will serve as your moderator for this evening. I am a member of the League of Women Voters of Pulaski County. During tonight's program, if you have any questions, we ask that you use the chat function to ask your question, and they will be answered following the presentation. Our guest speaker tonight is the Circuit and County Clerk of Pulaski County, Ms. Terri Hollingsworth. Terri Hollingsworth was elected on November 6, 2018 to a 4-year term as the Circuit and County Clerk of Pulaski County. She received the most votes of any candidate on the ballot in Pulaski County. Sworn in on January 1, 2019, Ms. Hollingsworth is the first African-American woman elected to a Pulaski County-wide executive position. She has worked in management positions in both the public and private sectors and nonprofit organizations. She has served on all levels of government and began her career working for the City of Little Rock as a city planner and later as the city's economic development administrator. Ms. Hollingsworth worked for the Arkansas Secretary of State and was director of the State Board of Election Commissioners. She is a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, Inc. and Lynx, Inc. and is a board member of Audubon, Arkansas. She is a graduate of Howard University in Washington, D.C. Ms. Hollingsworth earned a Master's of Business Administration from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. She and her son, Joshua Davis, are natives of Little Rock and attend St. John Missionary Baptist Church. I present to you, Madam Clerk, Ms. Terri Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Davita, for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate you. And I'm so happy to be here to be able to share news about how the voting laws have changed and to make sure that our public is aware of what's going on. I do want to start out by saying that of course in 2021, these laws were enacted by our state legislature. And since that time, we've had a couple of lawsuits, and Judge Griffin ruled that a few of these new voting laws were unconstitutional, especially the ones we're talking about tonight are unconstitutional. Our Attorney General, I believe just this last week, appealed that decision and asked for a stay of the voting laws. And the stay, of course, means to use the voting laws as they are at this point. And I think that from my understanding that Judge Griffin actually ruled today that the stay will not be in place. So I'm still a little confused about how things are working as it relates to these laws, but we're gonna operate under whatever the new rules and the new laws will be, but I certainly want to inform everyone about what's going on with the voting laws in Arkansas. So next slide, please. So of course, with today's agenda, we're going to talk about the laws that of course impact you, the voter. We're going to talk about understanding about provisional ballots and why we do provisional ballots. Going to do a little bit about redistricting and how it relates to you and of course my office. And then we'll have some election dates to share with you for you to remember for the remainder of this year. Next slide. All right, there are 4 new laws that impact the voter. And today, of course, I'm going to cover some of these in depth, and I want you to be aware of the changes as the voter. Next slide. 4 voting laws ruled unconstitutional, as I just said, by Pulaski County Judge Griffin, and that they were placing an undue burden upon the voter. And of course, there's the Attorney General has appealed the decision that they were unconstitutional and has asked for a stay. And then Judge Griffin again ruled today that that the stay will not happen. So next slide, please. Act 249 is the first one that I wanted to talk to you about, one of these new laws, and that the procedures governing voters who don't have acceptable photo ID when they are casting their ballots. Of course, in past elections, voters used to fill out a sworn statement, especially as it relates to absentee voting. They would fill out a statement of affirmation that said that I am the identity, I am who I am, and then that could be used in case the voter forgot to put their photo ID within the absentee ballot application. And so it also could be used for typically those voters as well who showed up in person, they forgot their ID, they lost their ID, all those kinds of things. But as you know, voters are required to take an ID so that their vote could be counted. Next slide, please. So the new law has been tightened up by removing this optional affirmation, and that the law, and you have to have, of course, certain forms of ID. And these ID forms are here, where you have to have either an Arkansas state issued driver's license, a photo ID, issued by the state. You can use your concealed handgun carry ID, a passport. You can use an employee badge. It has to have a picture of you on it. And if you know persons who don't have an actual ID and they need one, they can also come to the clerk's office and get this voter identification cards. But voters who cast ballots in person or by absentee and they don't provide proper documentation with their ballots will be considered provisional. You are now required to provide proof of your ID the Monday after the election. So you can provide it to my office, the clerk's office, or to the election commission. And so just let me tell you a little bit about the impact that relates to this. So in 2020 general election, the election commission accepted about 1,600 absentee ballots without a copy of their ID. So the way this law stands would be that those 1,600 people would not get their vote counted at this point in time because they didn't provide an ID and they didn't know to go to bring a copy of their ID to the clerk's office or the election commission by the Monday afterwards. So that sometimes that disenfranchised, or that could disenfranchise, about 16 to 2,000 voters. And we want everybody to be able to vote freely and fairly. Next slide, please. Act 728, of course, bars people from entering or remaining in an area within the 100 feet of the entrance of their voting site. So when you're in that line before you actually from the door of the voting place, within 100 feet, you can only be there for purposes of voting. You cannot hand out water. You cannot hand out snacks. So if it's a hot day and people are needing some things, they need to get those items from their vehicle, or definitely from an area that's 100 feet from that voting site to get that done. So the new law regulates, of course, it always said we could not campaign in that particular area, but now it is barring people from remaining or standing in that area. So sometimes you want to hug some people when you're coming out and you see somebody you hadn't seen in a while. Well, you can't, if you're going to hug them, you need to hug them quickly, because this new law will say that you're trying to do electioneering, and it will also try to determine and say that maybe you have people who will tell, and maybe you might end up with a misdemeanor because you're standing there talking to somebody, or because of the fact that you might end up giving somebody some water. So you want to be careful about this particular area and make sure that when you go vote and you get out of that particular area. Next slide, please. So Act 736 has 3 provisions that we want to talk about. And those provisions directly impact all of the individuals voting by absentee ballot. And so one requires the signatures of the absentee ballots be verified by checking registration application. So the clerk's office has to do that. The other one, I'm going to go over what how the impact, and then we'll go over them individually. And then the other provision in it requires that voters provide both the mailing address and your residential voting address on the absentee application. And then the other one is it makes the presumption of, I can't even remember, basically it's saying that you're trying to defraud the voting if you have more than 4 absentee ballots in your possession. So next slide, please. So Act 736, in the provision, it requires that the signatures of absentee ballots be verified by the clerk's office before we can actually issue that particular absentee ballot. So when you fill out your absentee ballot application, which I know you can't really see this, but see the words on it. When you fill out the application, of course, you have to sign it. Your signature here has to match your voter registration application. So you see those sample voter registrations right there. Of course, that's my signature in 2012 and my signature in 2018. And my signature has changed from there. So, you know, if persons have had, if folks have had some kind of ailment, maybe a stroke, or let's say they broke their arm the day before, they're trying to fill out this information and they have to use their other hand, then their signature is definitely going to change. What we've been out here asking is that folks who are of a certain age and they know that their signatures have changed, that they update their voter registration application and update their signatures, because we want to make sure that with your absentee ballot application and also your voter registration application, that they match so that we can make sure that we send those particular packets out to you. Let's go to next slide, please. Right here is the revised absentee ballot application. And so we want to make sure with this provision that we get both your mailing address and your residential voting address. So like number 1, it says the reasons why we're requesting an absentee ballot. We've always had to have a reason, and usually people will check the box, I will be unavoidably absent from my polling location on election day. That's 1. Number 2, it says, please select from the following options concerning your residence. Well, you would say, I currently reside within the county in which I'm registered to vote, or I currently reside outside the county in which I'm registered to vote, which is possible. If you're on a temporary work assignment, you could be living in another county, or you could be living in another state and you just want to be able to vote by absentee. Then it says, please select the election in which you wish to cast an absentee ballot. So of course, the May election is called the preferential primary. And then the November election is the general election. Then of course, we have the annual school election and any other special elections, but those are the different ones that you can choose from. And then number 4, this is where they're saying we have to have your mailing address. So it says, please select how you wish to receive your ballot. And you would check mail, and please send my ballot to the following address. So if your mailing address is different from your residential voting address, then you want to make sure that you put that information there so we can make sure that ballot gets to you. If it's one and the same, then just put the same address of what is your residential voting address. If you see down the bottom, there's some highlighted areas there. It says residential address of the voter. So that's where you want to make sure you put where you are registered to vote, that particular address. And then on another, it says date of birth of the absentee voter. We have a lot of problems with folks actually putting their today's date there. We want to make sure that you put your birth date there, not today's date, but your birth date. And then we need the signature of the absentee voter. That's the last highlighted area. We need the signature of the absentee voter. So make sure we have both your mailing address and your residential voting address, your signature and your date of birth, so that we can get that particular absentee ballot to you. Next slide, please. Okay, so The last thing with Act 733 is that absentee ballots have to be asked for by the voter. The applications can be readily available online or in paper form, but the voter must ask for one. So we've had voters that were on a list, and I think it was about maybe 1,000 of them that actually were on our list of folks who might have not been able to get out. They may have been in the assisted living places or something like that. And we had them on the list, but now the law says that we can't keep them on a list. So they have to actually call us or email us and ask us for the actual absentee voting application. So if you know people out there who are older, who don't get out, or even if they're younger, I'm sorry, I keep saying older because that's just wired in my brain. But if you know folks who don't get out and who need an absentee ballot application, please have them call the clerk's office or email us and tell us that they are requesting an absentee ballot application, because we cannot just send it out to folks arbitrarily or to all the voters. You have to call and request it. Next slide, please. Act 973 requires absentee ballots to be submitted in person, be turned into the clerk's office no later than the Friday before Election Day. So that law has changed, because it used to be if you were going to bring your absentee ballot in person, that you could bring it the Monday before the Election Day. Now you have to bring it in the Friday before the Election Day. And so that can kind of confuse the voter, since now, and it also shortens the voting time. So if you end up getting your absentee ballot late because of the mail or ballot packet, because of the mail, and then you got to turn it in, let's say you get it on Thursday, or maybe you even get it on Friday, then you have to rush and get it back to the clerk's office in person before Friday. If you're going to go ahead and mail it, same thing, it has to be in the clerk's office by Election Day. So that really hasn't changed. But we know that the mail these days can be slower than what we usually like. So that could be concerning. So ask for your absentee ballot ahead of time. Ask for, and so that way you can get it mailed, get it filled out, and then you can mail it in early if you like. Other than that, please make sure that you turn it in, return it to the clerk's office in person the Friday before the Election Day. And of course, anybody who is doing a ballot by authorized agent or that kind of overseas people, that of course they still have the same timeline they had before. So ballots can be returned by authorized agents still by hand on Election Day as they once were. Next slide, please. We're going to talk a little bit about the absentee ballot application, understanding provisional ballots. And so next slide, I want to just briefly discuss about the provisional ballots. And since taking office in 2019, my office has seen about 15 different types of elections, including school board, primary elections, and general elections, and runoff elections. What we have noticed is that there's a lack of understanding about provisional ballots. So a provisional ballot is a fail-safe mechanism for voters who arrive at the polls on Election Day and their eligibility is uncertain, which means they didn't bring in their ID, they forgot it, they lost it. And this particular fail-safe way of voting is a way that they can actually vote, but then they will have to bring their ID to the clerk's office or to the election commission's office to verify that they say they are who they are. But with the HAVA Act, the Help America Act, it requires that states offer this provisional ballot process for voters whose names are not on the voter list. And we have had voters who show up to the polls and they are not on the voter list and they have tried to vote. So we just, this is just a fail-safe way to make sure that we know who all the voters are, and that if your name is somehow not on the list and it needed to be, then this way we can verify it in that way. Next slide, please. So of course, the provisional ballots make sure that voters are not excluded from the voting process. We always want to make sure that there's somebody who's going to be in the process And we don't want them to be knocked off because of any administrative errors. And so when you arrive on election day, if your eligibility is uncertain, and then you, the voter, can use this provisional ballot, and the election official, the poll workers, will notify you that you have the right to use a provisional ballot. They will provide a paper ballot. They will witness your affirmation that you are who you say you are, and then they will receive your ballot for later processing. Additionally, the election officials must provide information to you, the voter, on how the process works and how to find out if your ballot was cast, if so, if not, if so, or why not. And that's usually something that would happen, of course, in the Election Commission's office. So reasons why people vote, again, why they vote provisionally is because, I'm sorry, here, this slide is telling you about the reasons why people vote provisionally, where the name is not on the poll or registration, their eligibility cannot be otherwise established, their identity or eligibility to vote has been challenged by the poll worker or election commission, and then they don't have any identification, as we talked about it, and then they requested an absentee ballot, and they might not have gotten that ballot, or they didn't cast it and they just wanted to go in person. So those are some of the reasons why they end up with that particular ballot. Next slide, please. Here are some of the reasons why the ballot is counted. A voter submits a proof of identity to the county clerk or to the county board no later than the first Monday after the election day. The voter did cast the correct ballot for their voter's residence, or the voter did cast the correct absentee ballot for their precinct. So that's how your provisional ballot would get counted. Next slide, please. All right. Can we go back? I'm sorry, go back to the next slide. When your vote is counted, the election commission, of course, sends over to our office a list of people who voted provisionally. We research the voter database to make sure that you are in that voter database. And with that, then we can determine that you are the person that you say that you are. And then it's up to that election commission, our 3-person board, to determine if your vote is counted or not. So it ultimately ends back over into the election commission hand after we do our review of it. In 2020, we had about 1,200 provisional ballots that were counted out of 2,400 people who voted provisionally in person. So roughly half those votes were counted. So we want to make sure that people are registered now, make sure that they are on the rolls now so that they don't have any problems when it comes to the May election. Next slide, please. Now we can, before we close out, just talk a little bit about redistricting and where our office is on redistricting and how it impacts the voter. So let's talk about the clerk's responsibility as it relates to redistricting. Next slide, please. So the County Board of Election Commissioners is, of course, a 3-person panel. The 2 commissioners are elected by the Republican County Party and 1 person by the Democratic County Party. And so they're responsible for drawing the new quorum court lines. As you can see that map there, they did draw the new quorum court map lines. And once they approved those maps, and they filed those maps with the county clerk's office, and then we were charged with making sure that all our voters were in their correct precincts and polling locations for the whole county. So we have completed that particular mapping process, and we have triple and quadruple checked it. And we are in the process now of getting ready to mail, or we're getting with the printer so that we can mail out voter registration for all voter registration cards for all 200,000 plus voters in Pulaski County. So just wait a few more weeks, and hopefully you will have something by November 1st, since we're almost at April at the 1st of April. So we're going to give that a few weeks to get in the mail. If you don't get anything by May 1st, please call us, and we'll make sure that maybe we can print one out for you and you can come get it, or maybe we'll try to mail it again. So we'll see. Next slide. Again, his new voter information card. Of course, it'll have your name and your school district zone, your Senate zone, your city ward zone, and those reasons why. Of course, as you can see, your name, address, and zip code. All of that information will be there for when you try to go and vote in person. All right, next slide, please. Here are some election dates to remember. First, April 25th, which is coming up in a couple more weeks, is the last day for anybody to register to vote, to be able to vote in the May 24th election. Of course, and then May 9th is when early voting begins. May 20th is the last day to transfer your voter registration from county to county. So if you move from one county to another, May 20th is the last day to do that and still be eligible to vote in the May 24th election. Of course, May 23rd is when early voting ends. May 24th is the actual preferential primary for election day. And then in the fall, of course, we're going to have at the general election, we will have election on May 8th, but October 11th is the last day to register to vote to be able to participate in that November 8th election. October 24th is when early voting will begin, and November 4th is the last day to transfer your registration from county to county to be able to vote in the November 8th election. And then November 7th will be the last day for early voting in November. But right now, of course, May is coming up. We want to make sure we're focused on those. Next slide, please. So I want to make sure that you stay connected with the clerk's office. We're always putting out information about the elections and things going on with the clerk's office. We're on Twitter, Facebook, of course, Instagram, and you can always reach us at www.pulaskiclerk.com. And so with that said, we'll answer any questions, Ms. Davida.
Okay, thank you so much, Terry. We have a question from one of our attendees.
Okay.
They want to know, does the address on the voter ID card have to match the address on the voter registration card?
Oh, no, it does not, but it would be very helpful. What has to match, what is the signature? The signatures are what have to match, especially for absentee voting.
Okay, thank you. Another question, who is enforcing the 100 feet act? How will voters know?
That is a good question. We don't have a definitive answer. I do know that the State Board of Election Commissioner has been given more enforcement power through laws enacted in 2021. So it's possible that they could have some people out looking at that. But other than that, there is no election police force, if you will, in terms of the enforcement. You just know that some people like to use their phones and tell on people and all those kinds of things, you know, in terms of how folks operate these days. So just be aware of that.
Okay, another question. What are we receiving in the mail about redistricting?
So the redistricting process happened, of course, all over the state. And what happened in the clerk's office was that we had to make sure that the mapping process matched with the lines that were drawn by the Pulaski County Election Commission. Once we did the mapping process, then that's how the clerk's office knows which precinct to put the voter in, which school zone to put the voter in, which congressional district to put the voter in. And so once we do all that through the mapping process, that's how it relates to our conversation here, and that's how it relates to our office. Once we do that, that's when we can get the new voter registration card out to you. So you know your school board zone, you know your congressional district, and you know your JP district as well.
Okay, Another question,
Just
will
ma'am.
the voter registration card be available online?
It's not available online for you to print off, no. But you can look up your voter information that has the same information on voterview.org, voterview.org. And it will tell you all of that information that would be on your voter card. But we typically, or at least we're required by law to definitely send out the a voter card to you, especially every 10 years after redistricting and the census and redistricting.
Okay, so Terry, with the voterview.org, can a voter check their voter status on that site
Yeah.
also? Okay.
Yes, they can check their status there also.
Okay.
So
Could
you
you-
put in your name, you put in your first name, last name, and your date of birth, and then your information pops up. And if you have any questions with that, they certainly need to make sure that they call the clerk's office, and then we can help them with whatever issues they may be having.
Okay. Another question that I have. What happens if a voter forgets to insert a copy of their voter ID in their absentee ballot application?
Okay, what happens is that when the packet comes back to the clerk's office and we check it in that it's back, then it goes into a secure box. And then it goes over to the election commission, and they have poll workers who are opening envelopes and checking all the information to make sure everything's there in that packet. And once they do that, if the ID is not there, they are supposed to make a list and try to contact those persons and say that that they need to come and provide their ID. Now, I will tell you that typically that does not happen because the process is so short, the timelines, typically that doesn't happen. So a voter could possibly not get their vote counted if they don't put that ID in the packet, especially with the new law. Now, what has happened before in previous elections is that a voter, not only if they forgot their ID, they also signed that particular piece of paper that is an affirmation that says, I am the voter who I say I am. And then, as I told you earlier, their ballots actually got counted because they actually signed that affirmation that said, I am who I say I am. But that provisional is no longer being put in those packets. And that's one of the laws that Judge Griffin declared unconstitutional. So once the appeal process is finished, then we'll know which way to actually proceed and how we fill out those fill out those absentee ballot packets.
Okay. Another question. Can voter ID card be used as your ID when you vote, similar to a driver's license?
No, it cannot, because it does not have a picture on it. Now, you can come to the clerk's office if you don't have an ID, and then you can get a voter identification card, because we'll take a picture of you and make what it looks like. Of course, it looks just like an ID. But other than that, what the voter registration cards we send out, because you don't have a picture on there, they cannot be used as a form of ID.
Okay. Another question. Are there different rules or requirements for ID for first-time voters as opposed to voters who have voted previously?
First-time voters, yes, they definitely have to bring their ID. They definitely have to show up in person to vote. They cannot vote absentee for the first time. They have to show up in person and vote, and they definitely have to take their ID.
Okay. A follow-up question about the voter registration card. Why are they not available online?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer for that. Maybe I need to look into that to see if they could be available online. That is a great question. It might have something to do with the software. However, I will check into it, and maybe that's something I can send back out to CALS and get it out to all your constituents who are watching today. So That is a very good question.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Question. What do I need to do to update my signature if I believe it has changed? I believe you talked about that. Could you walk us through that
So,
process?
what I would suggest that a voter do is anywhere that you can get a voter registration application, whether that's the library or whether you call the clerk's office, call our office and ask us to mail you one, then what you do is fill out your information, fill out the address, date of birth, all that good stuff, and then put your new signature and then mail it back to us or drop it off at our office and that kind of thing. So that's what you need to do. But of course, you know, if you call us, we'll mail you a voter registration app. You can call the Secretary of State's office, they should mail you one, but you should be able to get them at any library as well.
Thank you. Another question. Can I request an absentee ballot application now?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. We encourage you to do it too. Yes, you can.
Okay. Well, Terry, I don't see any more questions from our attendees. And I'm sitting here trying to think about a possible question that a first-time voter may have, or someone who's voted previously. The 100 feet rule. So you're telling us that person coming in, you're going to vote, you're in line, and you see a friend you haven't saw in a while, they come out and you want to, you know, because of COVID, we've kind of been distant. So if you hug them, you said do it quickly, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. And then, you know, typically some of us like to talk and chat and ask about loved ones and people we haven't seen, and that can get us in a lot of trouble. So you're saying move in, you in line, go in, vote, come out and wave and keep going.
That's what I'm saying, because they're saying that you should not be in that 100-foot line unless you are in the purpose for voting. And if you've already voted, then you have no other purpose. So you've got to get out of that line. I mean, you've got to be out of that particular 100-foot area is what I'm saying.
Okay. Another question. Based upon your response about first-time voters, then college students should vote where they are in school. And I guess that's the question. Should college students vote, you know, where they are in school?
You know, college students should ask for an absentee ballot and vote wherever where, you know, I don't, unless they're going to be there permanently, I don't think that they should do that. So yes, I understand they're supposed to vote in person instead of voting by absentee for a first-time voter, but not all college students are first-time voters. So
right.
Some can request an absentee ballot.
That would be from the state they resided in. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Another question. What are the penalties if you decide what are the penalties if you violate one of these new laws? Because I'm ready to give a thirsty voter a bottle of water. And that comes from someone anonymous.
Well, so I'm, you know, I think that the penalty is only a misdemeanor. So if you want to go ahead and challenge that law or even defy it because, you know, of course, a thirsty voter may need that water, then you go for it if you don't mind being challenged with a misdemeanor or you know, a misdemeanor given to you by whatever police officer or whoever they may have there or that kind of thing. But again, I don't know how they're going to enforce it. I would venture to say that election law may not be high priority list for police officers on election day, but you never know.
Okay, another question. Are there materials available that will be given to library patrons? If not, is it okay to lift? Oh, I lost my question. Okay, if not, is it okay to list the information you have provided tonight?
it's okay to list the information. We can give whatever information that library patrons need, or library employees need, whatever we need to have there. Let us know, and we'll be happy to provide that to the library, because we want to make sure that everybody has the correct information. So whatever we need, whether it's voter registration applications, whether it's absentee voting applications, we can provide that to the library to make sure that their patrons have that.
Okay. I don't see any more questions as yet.
And I wish we could. I mean, we're trying to make sure that we highlight all the forms in terms of the information that's needed, especially on voter registration applications. We usually don't get an email or a telephone number. So then if something's wrong, it's hard for us to contact that voter. And because those things are actually optional on the voter registration form. And I wish people would just go ahead and put the information anyway, even though it says it's optional. That way, if something's wrong, we'll be able to contact them. And we recently had a gentleman who was asking for his application for absentee voting. And this gentleman is over 90 years old. And we've had to contact him, and we've had to send him 3 different forms because he kept putting today's date instead of his birth date. And we gotta have the birth date to be able to get him the information. Of course, he was a little put out with us, but we were trying to help the voter and make sure we got it right.
Okay. Well, you've done a great job explaining these new laws to us. Just got to
Well,
see.
I appreciate the time and being able to do that, to inform all voters of what's going on in our fair city, county, and state. So we just have to stay in touch with us, and we'll stay in touch with you, because we'll know soon what if the laws get overturned in terms of the appeal process. So right now we're kind of in limbo, because as I said, Judge Griffin has ruled that they were unconstitutional, but the Attorney General's office has appealed that. And so now we're waiting to see what the ruling is going to be from there.
Okay, so we have another question, piggybacking on what you just said. If the election was tomorrow, would any of the 4 acts be enforced?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, I mean, I'm sure somebody would. My office won't be enforcing them, but they would be enforcing them, and we would make sure that we continue to we would go by what the rule of law is at right now.
Okay. Trying to see if they're okay. That was the last of our questions in the chat box, and in the Q&A. There are no open questions, so I do believe that is the end of our program.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Just a moment. We got a question.
Uh-oh, no problem.
Okay. This is from Cal's.
Okay.
thanking us both. Terri,
Okay,
you've done
thank
an
you.
amazing job. Keep up the good work. If it's anything that the League of Women Voters can do to help spread the word on these new voting laws, we're going to make sure that we keep talking about it, make sure people in our spheres know about it.
You guys are wonderful. League of Women Voters is always out there helping. You guys are wonderful. We need y'all. And so we'll definitely be in touch with you as well. You're great partners. Thank you so much. And so is Carol. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our attendees. Thank you for your questions. It's been amazing learning this new information. Now you know the 411. Go out and spread the word. Good night and stay safe.
All right.